Hello, and welcome to another episode of Here to Edify. Before we get started, I want to ask you to stop what you're doing and subscribe. We are 7 episodes in. I cannot believe it. 7 episodes. So come on, subscribe already. But also, I would love for you to scroll down, specifically if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, and give me a 5-star rating. That would be a huge help. And then, of course, if you happen to listen to a episode that speaks to you specifically, or that you think could speak to someone you love, share it. That is always a huge help as well. And once you have done all those things, I have one more request, and that is for you to go to @HereToEdify on Instagram and hit follow. That is where you will get all the updates when new episodes drop, but then also you'll just catch some of my thoughts on things that I've been learning on this journey in the midst of this podcast, but then also just in the midst of life. So now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's start this episode. Some of the best conversations I have had have been the ones where I was able to add to them. But the older I get, I realize that the conversations where I have nothing to add but everything to learn are also pretty amazing. So when I had the opportunity to sit down with today's guest and learn about a subject that I only know surface level, well, I jumped at the opportunity. On this episode of Here to Edify, I sit down with Master of Social Work, licensed school social worker, licensed clinical social worker, professor, and therapist, Shelton Young. We talk about his experience as a Black male therapist and the strides he is taking to decolonize therapy as it is taught, and thus therapy as we know it. Here to edify. 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 With you being a master of social work, my understanding of social work has always just been, working with children, but you have pivoted into therapy. And so what kind of sent you to that field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I originally started, I was majoring in elementary and special education. And you can imagine, being a Black male, I was still outnumbered in that program. And I was placed in my internship experience, and I did not feel prepared to go into the school as a Black man, right? We have this thing in the education field when you are in undergrad, called an OSTE, right? This is the teacher that you are assigned to. And I felt like he didn't know what to do with me. It was oh, I'm always used to having a white woman student, come and help me. And what do I do with you, right? And it's I didn't like that feeling. I remember that I had a second grade class, and there were these twins, right? One was in my class and the other one was in a third grade class next door, right? So obviously the one in my class had, was held back. And I remember they had just moved from another state, lost both parents, was living with an aunt, and that aunt was abusing them. And I remember bringing it up to the teacher that I was working with. And he was like, yeah, we don't get into that. You just need to make a referral to the school social worker. And I'm like, oh, okay. So the teacher is going to overlook the fact that this child is being abused, isn't eating, which we know when there's a lack of protein, you can't learn when you are not being taken care of, right? And so I remember I went and spoke with the school social worker, and surprisingly, I didn't know about school social work prior to choosing to major in social work. I didn't even know I had a school social worker, growing up, right? And once I switched over to social work, I looked back, I was like, oh, Mr. Jordan was a social worker. Or, Miss such and such was a social worker. I didn't know that. And I literally the next week, I switched my major over to social work with a school social work concentration. I wanted to be in the schools, and I wanted to provide some type of therapeutic alternative, right? Like for the students, connecting them and their families with resources, but also being a therapeutic presence for them. And yeah, I don't regret it. But even once I was in my BSW program, concentrating in school social work, was doing school social work internships, it was so limited. I was not able to provide clinical tools to them because I didn't have the training. Because at the BSW level, you're just really trained to do like case management, direct practice, connecting folks to resources. And it is not until your MSW program where you start to really learn clinical skills, where you have crash courses in the DSM-5 and understand the diagnoses and like how to assess for them and diagnose people and develop treatment plans. And so after my BSW program, I immediately went into an intense MSW program. Like I literally graduated and the next week I was in grad school. Like, so now like I have done a lot of different things. All of it has centered around families, children. Most recently, I worked with college students in a college counseling setting. And then currently I am the director of a school-based mental health program. So I'm the first therapist to be hired in the school district. They're still trying to figure out what the program looks like. I'm still trying to, develop it. Like I'm building the plane and flying it at the same time. But all of those experiences has really prepared me for this, to be back in the school, right, and providing those services to children and their families. And so,
as a therapist, I would assume that you have to be in touch with your emotions because it's therapy and that's usually what we think of. But were emotions something that you have struggled with on the journey to becoming a therapist?
yeah, absolutely. And I think I struggled with it on the journey of becoming a therapist because I struggled with them before ever knowing what I would become. I think that is a product of socialization. I think that a lot of times men are socialized to reject components of therapeutic processes, such as identifying your emotions and expressing your emotions, right? We do have some very rigid expectations for men when it comes to emotions. And so I think that I've always played it safe by just suppressing any emotions, to not be judged or to be put into a box as someone that's sensitive. And, the more you matriculate and learn and become more mature, especially as when I was a therapist in training, being in tune and in touch with your emotions is so vital for the work, right? Like I could not imagine not being having a higher level of emotional intelligence than I had when I started. I don't think I would be able to kind of, fulfill my job as a therapist if I did not make time and space for my emotions. And not to say that I'm perfect. I think I still struggle a lot with identifying emotions in the moment and calling them for what they are. And so I think that it's a journey, and I don't think there's no destination for emotional health.
Yeah, so as we talk about you being a man and emotions being a thing, we also can't deny the fact that there's kind of extra layer of that being a black man. Just the emotions and how it's just like that's not necessarily something that you guys have been given freedom to express. Considering all of that, it is historically uncommon to hear like the black perspective in regard to therapy, where, now you're hearing like black therapists and that's something that is arising now, but that's not historically how it's always been. And so I just want to know, have you felt the fact of you being a black male therapist in a female dominated profession, but also as we kind of spoke before, like this is a white female dominated profession. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So, so many things come up. I think that, for one, just to kind of start with like just being a black therapist, and I don't speak for all black therapists, but I know what's been the conversation, among me and my colleagues. And black therapists are still trying to figure it out too, right? We're still trying to figure out how to operate in this profession that was never designed, or there was never a vision to have us to be a part of the field, especially not being a provider. If anything, we were expected to be recipients of therapy and mental health services. And so a lot of the theories and the the founding fathers of psychology, like they were all white. And so a lot of times what we're practicing, and especially when you're in therapy school, whether you are a psychologist, a social worker, or a counselor, you are taught this whitewashed way of delivering services. And so Black people, especially Black therapists, we are trying to do our best to decolonize the way in which we practice, to meet our clients where they are, to provide culturally adaptive services that kind of honors who they are holistically. And I think as far as being in a field, like, I've obviously mentioned that the field was created by white people, particularly white men, but we now know that it is heavily populated by white women. And we also are very much aware of the harm that white women cause or can cause, right? When they have not done the work or have no desire to do the work. And I think I run into that a lot, where the same interactions that we're seeing playing out on social media or in the grocery store between anybody and a white woman, some of that stuff still exists among white therapists. And I think we have this idea in our mind that therapists are perfect, that they're doing the work. Therapists are human, and they are people with mess and that needs to be addressed. And a lot of times what I see a lot in our field is white saviorism, where these white women, especially if they are coming from the social work discipline, because the social work profession was founded in saviorism, right? And so they join this field because they want to help and they want to feel good about helping. And, and oftentimes historically, that help has overlooked the needs of the most vulnerable people that we serve, and it has not viewed them in their context. It's viewed clients, Black clients, in the ways in which history has always viewed them, in need, or you need to work harder, or you need to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. So in many ways, I've seen a lot of clients come to transfer to me from white therapists with more trauma.
Yeah, that is super significant. And as you speak about yourself and other Black therapists kind of decolonizing the way that you deliver these services, one, I find that interesting because I think oftentimes in these conversations, we don't necessarily consider like the founders, the foundation of it. And therefore it's like, oh, the founders of something had a perspective because these are people. And so they're coming from one perspective, and now hundreds of years pass and we're taking on this perspective and then kind of realizing, oh, I don't fit into this. The people I'm serving don't fit into this. So I would love to have you speak on specifically you, again, Black and male. How do you navigate this space? What are some of the things that you're like doing to decolonize the way in which you are offering this service?
Absolutely. So psychology has historically kind of focused on this internal pathology, right? Where like there's something internally going on in people. And we know that if you live long enough and you even take your own life into account, we understand that most of this is not some deep internalized pathology that we're talking about. This is environmental factors that is making people's lives harder. This is their interaction with systems, medical systems, mental health systems, welfare systems. These are, the system of education that's making life hard for people. I just think about the student loan crisis, right? Like it literally impacting people's mental health. And so I think for me, it's really viewing people in their context, like taking a holistic person and environment perspective where I see the person and then I actively work to see what is making your life hard. Like not just like, oh yeah, you're depressed, you meet the criteria, or you have generalized anxiety disorder, but like, no, like what else is causing these things? And obviously there are some times where, there's some concerns with like just biology, right? There's these biological factors that are causing mental health concerns, but more times than not, there are things that can be modifiable if we just sit and identify. And a lot of times too, it's not to say I don't use some of those approaches that, the white psychologists developed, is that I use them as a foundation. Like when you lay out a foundation and you see that there are cracks, you go back and you fill those cracks with what's going to work. And so if I'm doing cognitive behavior therapy and I'm with a Black person, I have to use culturally adaptive cognitive behavior therapy. Right. So we challenge those thoughts, those beliefs, and we're seeing how the emotions is impacting the actions, and the actions is, like there's this whole triangle thing that's going on. And my goal as a therapist is to kind of help guide that client towards the goals that they want to reach within their context, and not try to change who they are, not try to downplay the importance of their racial identity or their sexual identity or gender identity or any of those things, because they all are equally important. And so when I find that, therapists are practicing and they're never talking to a client about their racial identity and what that means to them, you're leaving out a whole portion of that person. And that goes back to that notion of erasure. Like, like you are literally like overlooking something that is probably the most intricate, like in that person, that is literally causing their life to be really hard right
now. So I looked up the definition of therapy, because that always just helps to know what does Webster say about this. So therapy is defined as any act, hobby, task, program, etc. that relieves tension. I would assume that all of these different factors, it is a beautiful thing to see yourself and I'm sure many others take this into consideration, like the whole person. Yet and still, I'm sure there's a tension of you being a Black male in this space, but then also you're a believer in this space. And this is not something that you're expected to or even allowed to be like, here, I'm sharing this with my client. But how does that just affect you, your identity, how you show up? How do you handle all that?
Yeah, my spirituality grounds me. I do not think that I could do my job without having a connection to God, without having or having experienced the Holy Spirit and knowing how to, access Him, in those times, because this is heavy work. There are moments where you are literally backed up session to session and you have very little time to process in between. And I know I know where my help comes from. I know how to access, the tools I need from God to be grounded and to be able to continue and doing the work. And a lot of times I don't ever find that I don't have to tell clients that I'm Christian or any of those things, right? I try my best to live out my spirituality and my actions with others. And so non-judgmentalism is so important in the therapeutic alliance. And that is something that I think that I am pretty good at. I'm not perfect. There's still some things that I have to work through, but I think that I can welcome any client, and how they show up, and try my best to understand what does their presentation mean to them. Helping them understand and explore the significance of who they are, whether they are Christian or not. And in moments where there is a question on the intake form that I typically ask the client, is like, do you have are you a part of a religious organization, or do you, what does your spirituality look like? And then on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you? 1 being not very important at all, 10 being extremely important. And so if that client has identified that they belong to a certain faith and it is really important to them, I can use that in therapy, because that's oftentimes a protective factor, being connected to and grounded in something greater than yourself. And so in moments where another client may identify as Christian, I do not automatically assume that we align. I kind of understand, like, what does that mean for you? Right. And so, and not try to impose my values onto them, and also not try to take on their values if they don't align with mine, right? But just having some type of mutual understanding where I can kind of understand them better and how they move spiritually.
Yeah, no, I can definitely appreciate that. This is kind of like another half. It's like, Jesus grounds you, but then also I just want to talk about like therapy for yourself, like therapy for the therapist. Tell me about that experience.
So initially, like, even thinking about, like just the field of social work, right? Like if I am, like this was literally my mindset while I was studying social work at the undergraduate level, right? Like if I become a social worker, then chances are I'm never going to need one, right? Like if I'm working in CPS and I have children, then I'm going to know not to abuse or neglect my children. Or if I am, receiving some type of social work service, that would probably equate to me not being a social worker, right? And I think that logic was put into perspective when I decided to get my MSW, and by the time I finished my BSW program, is that social workers are here to serve the vulnerable. I'm a vulnerable person. I'm Black in America, right? And so for me, I started therapy as an undergraduate. And just so my therapist just happened to be a social worker. And at this point, I'm very early on in my BSW journey, and I didn't know social workers could be therapists. I didn't know anything about clinical social work. I just simply wanted to be a school social worker. And so she kind of like opened my eyes up to like, wow, like social workers need social workers, therapists need therapists. And so that kind of broke that stigma down for me as a younger man trying to figure out who I am at this predominantly white institution that doesn't have a lot of programs that are designed for me. And, I'm outnumbered in my major, from a racial standpoint and a gender standpoint. So it was really confusing. And so like, I think that accessing therapy early on made it easier for me to understand the importance and how vital it could be. Once I got into my MSW program, and even after I graduated, I still have a therapist, right? Like I literally over the summer was in group therapy with other therapists, because of the impact of treating racial trauma, right? We're sitting across from clients that are dealing with the same thing that we are trying to process, right? And so like we see the memes where the client comes into the room and tells the Black therapist about what's going on in America, and then both of them sit beside each other on the couch, just like both of us need to be on the couch, right? And so that was quite an experience to see. Like, obviously, if I'm treating a Black client, I kind of know what they're presenting with. I kind of know the Black experience. But when it comes to like racial trauma and like just like the racial battle fatigue and burnout and just how drained Black people are, this summer really was different, and I needed more assistance, right? I still had God. I would still pray, but He places us on this earth to be helps one to another. And so I know that there are moments where you need to access some other human beings that are qualified to assist you in a way that other people cannot.
Yeah, no, that's good. So in the midst of all of this, I want to deviate to how your professional life has affected your personal life. And so you have an Instagram that is refined therapy, and I want you to talk about that. What is it? What are your hopes for it?
Mm-hmm. Refined therapy was something that I have been wanting to do for a long time and just never had the confidence to do it. I think that a part of my social work journey, like becoming a therapist and all those things, has been doing my own work and to get to a place where I can see myself as closely as possible to the way that God sees me. And, we can be hard on ourselves. So like growing up, being bullied and teased, and you start to internalize all the things that you hear, and you really silence yourself in the way that you don't understand. You silence yourself. And oftentimes you can't afford the silence because, for one, you're a therapist. Like you can continue to keep silent, and you're going to see clients, and then you're going to be activated by their trauma because it reminds you of your own. And so when you don't do the work in this field, you just don't last. And so I've had to get to a place where I am okay with me. I'm okay with Shelton. I'm okay with, all the things that make me me. And so that create and refine therapy was me holding myself accountable to never be silent again, to never hide the greatness and the light that I know God has placed inside of me. And it's touched so many people. It's touched so many people, more people than I can respond to. I really wish that there was time for me to just, respond to everybody that has a question for me, or even just like congratulating me or shouting me out, or, providing like testimonials. But I try my best to respond to as many people as possible. But yeah, it was a passion project, and it's simply like I'm still trying to figure out what I want Refined Therapy to be. Um, Initially, I thought that it was going to be a social media space where I kind of share tips around coping and literally like providing some type of outreach services where I can, address the mental health stigma in Black and Brown communities so that we can access care, right? Even explain, the barriers like insurance and healthcare and, all those things that are getting in the way of, Black and Brown people being whole. And so what you'll see is if you go to the page, you're going to see how I started out. And I even said it in my introductory post, like, I don't know what this space is going to be. But it quickly became a place for me to talk about being Black, being male, and being in America, being outnumbered by white therapists in clinical spaces. Like, it is, if you go, I'm completely transparent about my professional experiences and my experiences with racism and prejudice and all those things. And if anything, it's kind of validated some of the experiences of other Black therapists or other brown therapists, right? They're kind of like, oh my gosh, you put words to what I've been experiencing and I've never been able to kind of surmise it. And you've kind of put it together in a way that, I can share this with somebody else and they can literally have my experience. And so even for me, just to see like the responses of folks saying like, no, you are not crazy. I've experienced this in the workplace too. Like I did a post on gaslighting and it resonated with so many people. Like I think it's the most shared post on the platform. And so yeah, I don't know what Refined Therapy will become, but I'm open to the possibilities. Maybe, having some type of podcast component. I do want to be able to provide low cost or free therapeutic services to folks. I don't know if that looks like creating a fund where people can access that funding and they find a therapist. I just send the money to the therapist that they're seeing, really eliminating barriers, no hoops, no jumping through rings of fire to get the money. You're Black, you're brown, you need a therapist, boom, we pay for it, right? So I don't know, but I'm a creative. So I just haven't had the space to sit down and just really dive into all of what Refined Therapy could be.
I definitely am excited for you and wish you the best. So lastly, I just want to ask you, this is not necessarily tailored to you as a therapist. It's just you as a person, you as Shelton. What do you do? We are living in the middle of a pandemic, but even pandemic aside, we know this world is crazy, So what do you do to keep yourself uplifted in the midst of everything that is constantly going on?
Community. Community is the one word that comes to mind when I think about how I'm choosing to cope through this pandemic. And when I mention community, I mean it holistically, like literally. Like I don't go a day without praying, checking in with God, giving gratitude, reflecting on the blessings that I have, even in spite of all of the turmoil that we are experiencing, like not overlooking the fact that some things are going well. And, those things you should make room and time for, practice gratitude. Family, like this pandemic has really, like my family doesn't live in the same city as me. So that's something that I have always been sad about. But I've been able to get so close to my family. Literally have grown very close to my sisters, my mom, my dad, and then my friends. It's just been community. like really being around in a healthy way, right? Not in a way that exposes myself to the virus, but yeah, community is how I'm coping.
So yeah, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, like sharing what you've gone through. I think that it is, it's important to hear just everyday stories of people that it's like I'm operating in these spaces and it does not have to be perfect for it to be done well. So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Perfection has to be thrown out the window.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Here to Edify. New episodes drop every Wednesday and can be found wherever you listen, now also on YouTube. Thank you again and hope to catch you listening next time.